So lately, what's happened for us, if you're at work, you might have considered this yourself. If you're an office-based worker, we've transitioned to home working now. So for 3 years out of the 5 I've been for 31/8, I was commuting to Kent twice a week. So I had a 34-mile journey to make. I would get up at 6:30 in the morning, set off at 7 to start at 9, because that was the kind of journey that I took, just to get through the Dartford, crossing without feeling like you're completely. Anybody else doing that journey? Yeah, there you go. You know the pain, don't you? You know the pain. I found that actually I've sacrificed the southern waiting on my salary to stay at home, mainly because I was spending the same amount in diesel as I was getting my southern waiting. But also, I'm saving 3 hours in a car every day, which is quite nice. So I've got to say, my work is pretty cushy. One of the things I love, though, is being able to preach to my church on a Sunday, and they know that what I say to them has to apply on a Monday, to me and to all of those else. Granted, my workplace is now a Christian one, so that's different to other people's contexts, but I've worked in plenty of non-Christian environments there as well. And we're going to talk, thinking about how do we live as Christians in this changing environment. We're not just talking about how to share your faith, we're talking about what faith looks like in these environments. What happens when the structure changes around you? When the management decides, hey, we're just going to completely put you in a new department with a new team. When they decide that the salaries have to be cut or whatever else, your working hours have to increase. What does it mean? So I just wonder, for sort of 60 seconds, because I forgot to start my timer and I know I've only got 40 minutes, for 60 seconds is just to think about, this should work, if we can just move that on please, thanks. When you hear the words faith at work, what does it mean to you? When you hear the words faith at work, what does it mean to you? So, just to the person nearest by you, we'll get that up on the screen, just have a 60 seconds of what that means to you. Off the top of your head, don't think about it too much. 60 seconds, what does faith at work mean to you? Thanks, Rick. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what that's doing, but are you guys to just advance at point there? Yeah, thank you.
Not all the time, but I always come back to you though.
Okay, let's just as we come back, let's shout those out. What does it mean to you? So the words faith at work, somebody comes up to you and says, what does that mean to you? Shout it out. What does it mean?
Helps me cope with the day.
Sorry? Helps you cope with the day, yeah. Anybody else? That was a deep answer, that one. So, everybody's holding back now. What else does faith at work mean to you?
Being the church at work.
Being the church at work. That's an even deeper answer. Well done. Excellent. What else does it mean?
Being light in the workplace.
Being light in the workplace. Yeah. Do you want to unpack that for me for a moment?
I suppose sometimes the working environment, especially because of the secular society we live in, is obviously against our Christian values.
Yeah.
So you need to translate that Christian faith in the workplace, in the midst of this darkness and
Brilliant. Awesome. That's great. That pretty much sums up my seminar, so I can. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Anybody else? What else does it mean for you? Did anybody think that it meant about sharing your faith? Am I in the ballpark? Because I've made that assumption for the entire seminar, so that would help if 2 people have said it. Brilliant. I think sometimes when and I've been a chaplain in the workplace, so I used to be on the Epping Forest District Council chaplaincy team, so we would go around offices of, sort of 50, 60 people in a single office, and I used to wear a dog collar for that moment, so that if you walked into an office, they would see immediately who you were. And the ones that shrunk the most in their desk were the Christians, because suddenly they had to be identified as a believer if they talk to you or do that. And often the answer that I often got, or the statement I got, well, I have a private faith. I don't like to impose it upon people. And I think sometimes we feel this pressure to, if we're talking about being Christians in the workplace, we have to share the gospel with people, lead people to Christ, and that can be a real issue. But I have two observations about that. And if we can go on to the next slide, please. First of all, not everybody is ready to receive the gospel. And let me explain that. This is something called the Engel scale. Anybody heard of the Engel scale before? Fantastic. And so the Engel scale goes from -10 to +5. And what it means is that at -10, people have no God framework at all. That there's no concept of God. And it means that actually they're not ready to receive the gospel message yet. Because if you give them it, it's a wasted opportunity because they don't have a framework in which to reference it. And you'll see that it goes from -10, so that as you go down that list, you find that there is a vague awareness of Christianity. There's an awareness of a God. There's awareness and an interest, perhaps, that starts to develop. And so when we talk about sort of sharing our faith at work, or faith at work, trying to be explicitly and overtly Christian, trying to get people to come to Christ, we perhaps need to stand back and just think, actually, where are people at that we can help move them on one point in that journey along? And you may find yourselves in a place where you're just part of that chain as it goes along there as well. And then, if we can go on to the next slide, please, my other sort of observation about that is that, as it's already been said tonight, there's more to having faith than preaching the gospel. So our sole aim to get converts into the church, to see people transformed, is absolutely right. And that's what God calls us to do. He says, go and make disciples. But actually, in a context of our workplace, we have far more than preaching the gospel to do. And so we have something called the 6 M's. None of this content is new tonight. If you are a fan of the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity, you will recognise maybe some of this stuff, because this is where it all comes from. This is a course that we did in our church. Because proclaiming the gospel is only one aspect of our lives as a believer in the workplace. Paul gives a list in Galatians, which you will probably know really well, called the fruits of the Spirit, that are produced when we abide in Christ. And exactly what you said about being light in our workplace is that actually we can produce these things when we abide in Jesus. Fruits: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control are all fruits that come from abiding in Christ with the Spirit living within us. And so, we find that actually, if somebody is going to want to do a gift audit of the Holy Spirit first, because I'm from a Pentecostal church, and that's what we love to do. We love to do, what spiritual gifts do we have? Actually, I look at, first of all, what spiritual fruits do we have, because that's going to be most relevant in your life in comparison to the gifts, which often are mostly used in church context, whereas actually they ought to be also used in work context there as well. So we're just going to go through these 6 things. We've only got 40 minutes, so we can't spend long on them, but we're going to just simply reflect upon not the excuse that you don't have to preach the gospel, because it's part of it, but actually realizing that we are part of a much bigger thing in our workplaces, so that when we go into our schools, when we go, what sort of workplaces do we have? Where do you all work?
Teacher.
Sorry?
I'm in school.
You were in a school, fantastic, yeah. Where else?
Okay.
Healthcare? School? School? Got a lot of educationals in here. Anywhere else? Church, social care. Oh man, you're on the one of the toughest front lines going. Yeah, I feel sorry for social care workers. We'll pray for you afterwards. It's you need daily prayer. Anybody else? Retail. Yeah. Any other workplaces? Any trades? Have we got any trades in? We're trades. Trade. Yeah, there we go. So office workers. Have we got office workers? People that generally just work in an office. Yeah. And what sort of office environment are you in?
Defence electronics.
Defence electronics. That's a cool office environment. I tell you what, that's what do you do? Defence electronics. Wow, brilliant. I normally, the best time to tell somebody you're a pastor is on the 6th hole of the golf course, when they've been swearing the other 5 holes. It really puts them off their game. Let's think about this. Modeling godly character. It sounds obvious, doesn't it? But, you know, there clearly is a risk of all of us not bearing those fruits of the Spirit in our workplace. And how hard it is in our workplace to model godly character. When I was working in school, so I don't know if this relates to you guys in education, but you know, I was in the SEND department, the special educational needs for those who do that, and that, you know, pastoral care was wrapped into that. And the opportunities to gossip about other staff members, high, right? Am I true? Yeah? Yeah, I don't feel, if you feel convicted, we'll have confession later, and that's fine. Modeling godly character may sound like something obvious for Christians, but actually in your workplace, in the staff rooms, in the around the water cooler, and wherever it may be that you're there, and when the staff are having their breaks or whatever else it is, that's actually a place where modeling godly character is probably one of the hardest areas in which to be able to maintain a godly standard whilst trying to maintain friends in the workplace, right? Because the moment you step out and say, that's not right, you feel like, hey, you know, there's a barrier raised between us there as well. God forms our character through the Holy Spirit to be more like Jesus in the most unchristian of places. But we also realize that being more like Jesus isn't always about being gentle, but it's also about standing up for the truth there as well. And we're going to come on to that about truth and justice just later on. Maybe it's promoting peace by mediating arguments between other work colleagues. Maybe it's about not taking that backhander of money if you're in a trade, you know, just to say, hey, it's cash. You know, will you do it for anything less? And you know what that means, don't you? You know it's about not recording that income and going in for those. There are challenges where modeling godly character is everywhere in our workplaces, everywhere on our front lines. And I talk about front lines because we're talking about faith at work, but actually this is faith on our front line. And your front line is wherever you spend the most of your time. And so it's not just the workplace. We're going to watch a video about that later, just briefly. Making good work. Do you know, sometimes our everyday tasks can seem a bit meaningless, or it's just a means to an end. But making good work means realizing that everything we do is to the glory of God. Colossians chapter 3, verses 23 and 24 says this: whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. So, you know, healthcare workers, that moment that you're having to clean up somebody's mess that they've made, and it's degrading perhaps, sometimes feeling like it's at the worst end of the work spectrum when you're cleaning up somebody else's mess. Actually, the Bible's telling us that we're doing that for the Lord. You know, when somebody's asked you to file away in that office moment, you know, all of those secret documents about, you know, all of the Russian work and spy work in the elections that you're going on in your defense electronics, you know, it feels like a meaningless task, but we're doing it for the Lord, making good work. I've asked Sid and Laura just to bring a couple of minutes testimony on one or two of these areas tonight. So I'm going to ask Laura just to come and tell us how she makes good work.
Thanks. Well, I'm just going to give you another Bible verse actually similar to the Colossians, because I actually went to a Christian primary school, where our school motto was from Ecclesiastes 9 verse 10, which says, "Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might." And I think that sort of stayed with me when I left school and went into the workplace, and sort of maybe explains why I tend to work quite hard when I apply myself to things. I'm quite diligent. My first full-time job that I had was in Suffolk at a disability charity, and my role there was to be on reception and various sort of administration duties. And one of my tasks that I had was to make sure there was enough stationery for everyone. It was the headquarters of the charity, everybody would be using different supplies, So I needed to keep track of when things were getting low and order in, obviously, stock ahead for events and things that were coming up. And I actually really prided myself, maybe I'm just a bit sad, but on keeping that stationery cupboard really clean and tidy. Everyone that came into it could find what they needed. I labelled where things were so they could see it all at a glance. And that, you know, is a small thing, but to me, you know, I prided myself on it. And actually the fact that I was doing it well did actually get noticed. So there was a manager of the leisure team who I think he was just a sort of disorganised, untidy sort of type person, and he really noticed that this stationery cupboard was being kept tidy, and he commented on it quite often. And then some months later, he actually asked if he could have me work in his department. I think he had some cupboards and various things that he wanted tidying out, and he thought I would do a good job at that. So actually how well I'd applied myself in that quite small thing had been noticed, and it meant that I got essentially a promotion in sorts. So I then took on some additional responsibilities in his team. My next move was we actually moved away from Suffolk. We moved to Surrey and got married. And so in my leaving do, that same manager, I remember still him saying that, well, Laura, you're moving house, you're getting married, you're moving to a whole new area, starting a new job. Those things are really stressful and there's a lot to organise, but if anyone can do it, you can, because he sort of had this sense that I had these organisational skills. But I don't think it was just about being naturally organised. I think it was that I was applying myself and I was giving of my best and, you know, making good work. And that's something that stayed with me. So when we moved away to Surrey, I've been working in a charity there for 12 and a half years. And I think my commitment and my hard work ethic was also noticed there. So originally I was only on a temporary role there while they had funding, and they chose to take me on a permanent basis. And then they promoted me and they put me through training that they paid for, the Charity Masters programme. And I think really that was because they wanted to invest in me, because they saw that I was invested in what I was doing and that I was giving of my best. And then during the pandemic recently, we had to double our efforts as a charity to make sure that local communities got the support that they needed. And that actually did mean working a lot of extra hours. We doubled our income and doubled our outgoing support. And then I stepped down from that role just in March this year, and I had my leaving do on Zoom. But I remember Sid saying at the end, because he joined us, he said, it's nice to have my wife back. And that was all he said. And actually, in a way, that was all he needed to say, because it spoke of how much I'd applied myself during the time that I'd given there. So hopefully I've embodied that school motto of whatever my hand finds to do, I do it with all my might.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah. My daughter is 13, she's in secondary school, and her reports come back. And one of the things that you know, we love about it is that she's attaining well in terms of her grades, but one of the things we love the most is that her report about her behaviour, her attitude to learning is excellent across the board, apart from PE, because she loves drama, but she's not a PE kind of girl. You know, but generally her attitude, and that matters more, you know, that making good work, that attitude to your work, to value the little stuff that you get. And, you know, sometimes people wonder, you know, why promotional opportunities don't come their way necessarily. I guarantee, you know, if you make the good work, it will be something that if it's available, it's not available in every organisation, but where it's available, there will be progression in those things there as well. Modelling godly character, making good work, ministers of grace and love. This looks like the friend who, you know, who just is able to gently talk to others. Ministering grace and love in a workplace where there is hostility is so important. And I found, and I think for me, you know, when I went to the high school, secondary school, I went almost with a sense of I was a failure at ministry. But actually I found that I was, you know, a good minister because actually I was doing it well in my secondary school sort of context. That actually where there was an air of conflict, I found that I could be the chaplain within the team even though I was employed to do other stuff to support kids. And so just the ability to be able to be a listening ear, to also offer comfort and care, and also to help reconcile, again we'll come a bit more onto that later, but Actually, you know, that time that I was able to share with other people was really important. And so I found that I could minister grace and love in hostile situations where other people would be fairly vengeful, I think. You know, there's a huge amount of unforgiveness in our society, really, I think. And I think that when you're able to minister grace and love, to have a timely cup of coffee with someone, to notice that actually you may not socialise with them in your workplace or normally, but you know, to notice that they're having a bad day and to have that cup of coffee with them is a ministering a grace and love sort of moment, and that's something that you can do in your time and steps outside of the boundaries. Taking 10 minutes out to talk stuff over with someone. You don't have to be a trained pastor to listen to someone. You know, 90% of pastoral care is just good listening. Just attention, time towards other colleagues. You can be known for that there as well. Ministers of grace and love. Moulding culture. Culture is powerful, isn't it? I don't know if you ever walked into an office, anybody gone into a new workplace and immediately sensed a culture that's a bit tense? Yeah? Social work. Can you give us an example? Have you got a time? Is it the entire social work industry going?
No, I mean mental health, really, I love mental health, social work, yeah. Yeah, anyway, I have different roles, different hats, really. I'm also a mental health practitioner, so we do mental health assessments, we do in the hospital. That's what our responsibility very much is. So that's our responsibility is evaluation of support for customers, carers, to do their job, assessment, carer assessments.
Yeah.
Yeah, put them back into care.
Yeah, and you know, certainly in the social care mental health sector, from my awareness of that just through doing referrals to, it's a tight-pressed industry, and it's an industry of discharge, really, isn't it? To move them on as quickly out of that care system as possible, and you know, that culture can feel really, really pressured. And when you feel like you're dropping, you know, you have to end up dropping your standards to meet the cultural expectations as well. Culture can be anything from a culture of having to meet the expectations to push something on because there's a target and a deadline to meet. And the culture can also be a culture of backbiting or a culture of individualism where there is no cohesive support network like there is in my, you know, 31A. It's a great environment, but we're a Christian environment, so it's slightly different. You know, in the school environment, there was a culture of promotion and getting 1 foot above. And so if you could do it better than someone else, you know, you wouldn't help the other person because that would be against you in your promotional opportunities. But we have an opportunity to build culture, to mold culture there as well. We are trying to mold culture in our church at the moment. So not a workplace moment, but we're trying to mold a culture of discipleship. And one of the things that we realise and recognise is that that's not something you can do through a 6-week course. You can't mold culture in 6 weeks. You can't mold it in a year. We're realising that actually the culture that we can mold is going to be over years worth of drip feeding ideas, drip feeding examples, drip feeding lifestyle in front of others in order for them to receive that culture, in order for that culture to build up. If you think about a culture of just, you know, some sort of physical culture, a biological culture, it takes time to grow a bacterial culture. Not that, well, the healthy kind of bacteria, like the yogurt we were eating after dinner at St. Laura's. You know, bifidus digestivum or whatever that's called. It takes time to build that up. So the commitment to changing your culture at your workplace, if you know that there's a negative culture in your workplace, thinking about the other stuff that on this list will help build into that culture. Buying the cup of coffee for the boss who isn't liked by the whole team is starting to drip feed culture, because let's face it, you know, if your boss knows you don't like them, they're not going to like you back any furthermore. They're going to do the necessary things. So being able to just to support somebody who you know their job's not easy. You know, we all hate politicians, at least 3 of us do, and you know, actually, we don't have a clue as to what it is that they do in their entire work, and we'd be naive to think that we can do it all better just because we disagree with one part of their policy. So, I think like with our managers, we realise that there's work that they will do or whatever it is that actually we can't appreciate necessarily. We don't know their home circumstances or whatever else, but we can change the culture towards them. Perhaps if that's one of our workplace issues, by simply doing little things that build time up. And what about the office social life or the shop social life or whatever else it is? What about the culture that's already existing? Is it a culture of partying? Is it going out? If you go into London at 5 o'clock on any given weekday, you will find all of the pubs in the business district completely full. So what kind of culture can we change simply by offering something different? What about a friendly game of something in the park if that's where we work in the city? Or what about a walk at the weekend that we may, say, hey, guys, on a Saturday, if we live locally, if that's the case, not everybody does, why don't we get together? It doesn't have to be Christian, it doesn't have to be the gospel, it just has to be culture shifting, bit by bit, changing those there as well. Then we come on to being a mouthpiece for truth and justice. Whether we realise it or not, it's something that we do every day. It can be as simple as refusing to engage in the gossip that's taking place in our workplace there as well. It can be speaking up for the colleague who's been overlooked. Actually, injustices can happen where people are promoted because it's not what you know, it's who you know. And perhaps maybe there's that opportunity to say, do you know, in the shop that I work at, wherever it is, I saw Jake, he was stacking those shelves the other day, and he was doing a really good job. We all wait for that in our appraisal, but what about appraising others on their behalf when it's positive to be able to speak out for those things? In 31.8, I'm a helpline practitioner. So what that means is if you ring us up for a safeguarding advice on a Monday or a Tuesday when I'm in, I will be the first person to take your call. And my job is to reach a threshold, and if it goes beyond the threshold, then I will pass it on to a duty advisor. But there are times when I can do the advice. I can put together an advice document because it's something that I'm skilled at. And I did that one day, just put an advice document together, sent it off, and all of our documents get reviewed by a senior advisor. And so I got a message a couple of weeks later from my supervisor saying that the duty advisor, Lace Jackson, her name was, Lace had just put a comment on here saying that was a really excellent piece of advice, he should be commended. She didn't have to do that, it's not part of her job description, but boy did it make me feel good because somebody else mentioned what I'd been doing. So, being a mouthpiece for truth and justice, making sure that other people aren't overlooked, part of moulding culture, part of ministering grace and love, all of these work together. What an example that is as a Christian, that we can look out for other people's well-being by pointing out to our line managers, our supervisors, our CEOs when somebody else does work really well. Being a mouthpiece of truth and justice, make sure that the truth gets out. That actually, if you know that 4 or 5 people are covering up for a mistake, maybe it's the social care industry, isn't it? When a mistake has happened and it's a genuine mistake that can be rectified, but that 3 other social workers are saying that this is the way, but that there's another truth. Standing up for that is really hard work, but standing up for it is really what God calls us to do, to promote fair and good and just practices. So all of those things, those 5 so far that we've got, they are fruits of the Spirit. They are the production of the life in the Spirit that brings to us in the workplace. And they're not one of them isolated in itself. But it may be that you look at some of those and go, do you know what? I think I'm actually quite good at that. And there are others that maybe go, do you know what? I could do that better. But then they all come potentially, but not always, to being a messenger of the gospel. They come to that awkward moment, when we have to sort of tell people, perhaps maybe why we love Jesus, if we're allowed to, in the workplace. I've asked Sid tonight, because he's a bit of an evangelist. To be fair, you can't really go through a whole conversation with Sid without him mentioning Jesus in some sort of way. But no, I've asked Sid to just come and share his experience of being a messenger of the gospel. Thanks, Sid.
Good evening, thank you for having us. I guess I am an evangelist, and there's a reason for that. Jesus has done an awful lot in my life, and so I think I find it really hard not not to betray that in the way that I behave. I think if we look at all 5 that go before, they all are versions of being a messenger of the gospel. I think every single one of them is a way that we can share the gospel. When personally, I have found that when I display the 5 that are above, or even 1 or 2 of them, people notice, I stand out, and people make a point of saying, hang on, this guy's like me, he looks like me, he sounds, well, maybe I don't look like them, but he sounds like me, and yet he doesn't behave exactly the way that I behave. I work in the construction industry, or I did until we took on our year's internship, and building sites are notoriously heavy on swearing, dodgy stuff, cash payments, all of this stuff. So I lived in a world after finding Christ that enabled me to stand out based on the 5 that go before being the messenger of the gospel. And because of the fact that I stood out, people would approach me to ask me about the gospel. They would ask me, how come you're different? I mean, if I give an example, often people think nothing of using filthy swear words on a building site. If you hit your hammer, do you know what, if you hit your thumb with a hammer, you don't even have to do that. People use it as a verb, is that right, wife? An adjective, whatever it is. I'm not educated enough to know what it is. But they use it at every 3rd word. And what they also do is say, oh, Jesus, or oh, God. And they blaspheme without even realising what they're doing. It's just something that lots of people do on building sites. And when I work with people, I would ask them not to use the word Jesus or God in vain. You can say F, and you can say this, and you can say that. But it just hurts me when you say Jesus or when you say God in the way that you're saying it. And I never ever had anyone say, mind your business, don't tell me that. Everybody respected the fact that my life has changed because Jesus has come into it, and they wanted to work with me on that basis. So I think that enabled me to be a messenger of the gospel. There was one occasion where I had a boss who was really dodgy. I was working at a company, and once I'd worked there for a while, I learned that this guy was buying materials that had been stolen. A lot of the tools that were around had come off someone that had taken them from somewhere else. There was hire stuff with this hire name scratched out. A lot of the payments, he'd just give me an envelope with cash in it. And so I was aware of the environment that I was in, and he came to me one day and said, this is the guy who owns the company driving a Bentley, said, I recognise the fact that you're different, and I'm really intrigued by it. Can you tell me a little bit about what has brought you to where you're at? And so I told him about the journey. He knew a little bit about it. I told other people on site about it. And he came to me and said, you know, I love the way that you are, and I want to be a little bit more like you are, but I don't think God could love me. I don't think God could accept me. I'm just too bad. Like, I smoke weed, I get drunk, I deal in dodgy stuff. And it enabled me to tell him that I've been there, that there is nothing that you can do that can separate you from the love of Jesus. Absolutely nothing. And it was a real blessing. It didn't lead into the Lord, but I like to think that I planted a seed. I had a long conversation with him about it, and he would constantly mention things to me in passing. And so I think that displaying all of the 5 do enable us to be a messenger of the gospel, but they open the door. They open the door and make it possible for people to ask and for us to be able to respond. When we model that behaviour, it makes us really easy to share the love of Christ in our workplace.
You can't give Laura one and not. If you really think about your journey to faith, which is really always the mission, isn't it? Go and make disciples. How do we make disciples? We bring them to the Lord. If you really thought about it, if you wrote down every single person who led you to that decision, you'll realise that it's not the person who led you to that decision on the night that you made that decision on the day. It will actually be, in my life, probably there's 30, 40 different people who witnessed to me in different ways, all of these sorts of ways, really, that made a difference. What I want to do is we've got a little bit of time, but just to, next slide please, just to do a quick discussion again, 1 or 2 minutes. Which of these do you do well? Which of these could you do better? Don't be bashful about it. Be honest if you feel like you do well. You know, maybe you do have a role in your workplace where you do reconcile other people, or you do mold culture. Have a think about which of these do you well, which could you do better? And doing better is not about putting yourself down. It's simply about saying, Lord, this is where I need your help in more. If you want to just turn to the person nearby you as you did before, do that for 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, and then we'll move on with a quick illustration.
But not well known.
That you share the gospel.
It's really hard.
And never get it all done, so I can't say that I ever feel like my heart for that. No, I can't, so I have to say like that's enough today and that's that. So nothing's ever really where I wanted it, but
Just give you 30 more seconds.
yeah, I have to just stop, yeah.
Okay, if we can just draw that back, that'd be great. Brilliant. So tonight's not about a guilt trip and saying, here's a list of things that you don't do, you know. Actually, how could we do it better? LICC, next slide please, they use this image. I think it's a brilliant image. It's the gathered and scattered church. If you've seen that before, anybody? Cool. 6% on roughly average of our nation attend church regularly. So if you categorise that out of 100, that's 6 dots out of 100. And so on the Sundays, it's like that first part of the square. They're all gathered. They're all in the same place. And then in the rest of the week, be it either Monday to Saturday or depending on when you gather for church, they are scattered among the other rest of the 94% of the population. So you're not together and you're alone. So that time that you spend gathered is so, so important. We've got a video which will hopefully work, and that should explain a bit more.
There's 168 hours in the week. Just for the sake of argument, let's assume you sleep for 48. That leaves 120. For people in church activities, unless they are employed by a church or they have a lot of voluntary time, the maximum number of hours they're going to be able to give to gathered church activities, to worship, to fellowship and to outreach ministry is 10 hours a week. That leaves 110 hours. 110 hours of life at home, life at work, life with friends, life at leisure. The question for a whole life disciple making church is, how does the 10 hours together that we spend equipping people, how does that enable people to live well for Christ in the 110? And how do we hear what's happening on the 110 area of life? How is that shaping what we do together in our 10 hours of gathered church? The relationship between the 10 and the 110. It's the crucial relationship. It's a relationship we need to get right. It's the relationship that feeds each other.
think we'll find and agree that 10 hours at church is a really massive figure, and that actually our average is probably maybe between 3 and 5 hours. So how does that impact the 115 hours perhaps that we spend elsewhere? How do we move from the I hate Mondays to thank God it's Monday? How do we get to that sort of place? Well, actually, you know, it is so good to study the Bible in our small groups and all those sorts of things. Obviously, it's really important to know what the Bible has to say about these things. But actually, you know, what if we shared just once a week, that everybody just shared one way in which they made their workplace better as a Christian? One way in which they witnessed to Jesus without having to say it in words. It's not a cop-out, because what we've understood and realized is that just because you don't speak the gospel directly doesn't mean you don't live it out in your life in the workplace. So we're not saying it's a cop-out to not talk to people directly about the gospel, because we've just accepted that not everybody's in the place to receive it, and so therefore it wouldn't be useful to give it. But there are all of those other things. Being a modeling godly character, being a mouthpiece of truth and justice, doing all of those things, making good work, all build up to that potential question, why are you different? Why is your life different to mine? And so when we find that actually perhaps sharing real life stories of the workplace, sharing a story about keeping a stationery cupboard full doesn't sound like perhaps like it's the most revolutionary thing. No, nobody got healed in this story, you know. Nobody gave a prophecy in this story. But you know what? When you do work well, it adds into the chain of which brings people to a place where potentially they can help. And so LICC have a prayer that they pray. It's going to be on the screen, and we're going to pray this together tonight. It's a prayer of simply praying, Lord, help me to do the 6 M's that we do. So let's all speak it out together. Father, help me to model godly character, make good work, minister grace and love, be a mouthpiece for truth and justice, and a messenger of the gospel, and to your glory may